quick thank you to all of my Patreons, and a special shout out to Lemu, Firebringer Axel, Enigma Desu, and Ryder Nia for pledging the higher tiers. Your support is heavily appreciated. So, I know I didn't make a summer video again this year. Life got a bit too hectic, I'm sorry, but hopefully this video makes up for it instead. So, crossovers, where you bring two beloved properties together, see characters from both series colliding, and reap the benefits of exposing your favorite stories to a brand new audience. You love them, I love them, maybe a bit too much, and I think that humanity as a whole will always inevitably enjoy the existence of a good crossover. Fate Grand Order is no exception to this, and thankfully, the devs at Type Moon make sure we always have one collaboration event every year at Golden Week, even if the last one's status is extremely debatable, with interesting stories, for the most part, fun mechanics, for the most part, and of course, crossover characters to summon, for the most part. These collaboration events, unsurprisingly, end up becoming some of the best that the game has to offer, with Karno Kyokai, Prisma Ilya, and CCC all being massive fan favorites. On my end, these are the events that I truly look forward to with every fiber of my existence. They essentially give me life. There have been a lot of collaborations so far, but there are also a lot of collaborations that haven't been made as well. And so, I wanted to use my abilities as a Type Moon lore addict to sort of theorize and share potential options for future collaborations, as well as look at the potential characters that we might get as summonable servants. The general trends that I see Type Moon following for their collaborations so far are, they always connect in the Nasuverse in some way, and make sense in the context of Fate Grand Order's story. This is because I do recall Nasu saying in an interview that he would want collaborations to make sense in context of the world, so that is a restriction. The other is that there tend to be at least two limited servants, one limited 5-star and one welfare 4-star, with occasionally a banner 4-star or maybe even a limited 3-star added, as well as an extra 4-star on a potential rerun. So, with that being said, let's address the elephant in the room and get the most obvious option out of the way first. With the Tsukihime remake finally being announced and soon to be released next month, it's not hard to predict that this event's going to be a thing sooner or later. In fact, a lot of people predicted that this collab would be the one for this year, even though it ended up being that. Although, I think it makes a lot of sense. Probably because the story isn't actually out yet. It would kinda suck to get massive spoilers right off the gate, wouldn't it? The remake is not the original, so why make an event for something that isn't even out yet? That being said, I do think it's virtually guaranteed to be the event next year. And for those who somehow at this point don't know what Tsukihime is the very first visual novel Type Moon made and is the work that the company owes all of its early success to. So, what servants can we expect? Tsukihime has the biggest cast out of all of these options, so there's a lot to pick from. However, I'm going to have to unfortunately rule out our fan favorite maids, Hisui and Kohaku. Reason is, while they do have abilities technically, when all said and done, they are normal people. They have no fighting potential outside of Melty Blood because visual novel fighting games are way too common, so they're probably not happening. They'll probably be in a CE though. The most obvious servant choice though will be none other than Arcuate Buryun Stud. Everyone expects her, no doubt about it. For her class, a lot of people seem to think that she's gonna be a berserker since she was one in Fate Extra, but I'm gonna shoot that down right off the bat. That is almost definitely not going to happen because it is explicitly stated in Fate Extra that the only reason she became one was because Gato was an incredibly incompetent magus, and his warped view on life made poor Arcuate lose her mind as well as most of her power. While Gouda isn't exactly an amazing master, they're definitely a better one than Gato, so Berserker is not happening. So, what class will she be? I have two guesses. The first one is a class most of you probably don't know, which is Funny Vamp, or Temptress in the Fate Extra English localization. Now what is Funny Vamp? Funny Vamp is actually a unique servant class made specifically for Arcuate. It is stated in Fate Extra that if Arcuate was to be summoned properly, she would manifest as a Funny Vamp servant. If this ends up happening, that's a big thing to look forward to, as that means we'll likely have a new class getting added into the game. Like BB's Moon Cancer, it might even give us more options for more vampire-based servants like Dead Apostles. The other one is a bit more boring, but also more logical. Foreigner. Archway can technically be classified as one since her origins are extraterrestrial. And well, if Voyager can get his unique class stripped from him and shoved into the Foreigner class, who says Archway can't either? For Noble Phantasm, it will probably be Marble Phantasm, although perhaps in order to make it more personal to Archway, they might make it the Millennium Castle Baryun stud, which is also an application of Marble Phantasm. If so, it'll probably be a support NP, or super buff NP like Super Orions. The second most likely servant candidate is of course the protagonist, Shiki Tono. While Shiki isn't exactly a marketable waifu, he's the protagonist. Not including him would be a crime. Shiki Tono's abilities are very similar to Shiki Ryogi's from Karno Kyokai. Some would even say that he's a watered down version of Ryogi, but they'd be wrong. Watch Tycoon Character Showcase Shiki Tono. Due to their similarities though, I also don't think that Shiki would classify as anything other than an assassin. Maybe alter ego, but that's stretching really hard. His Noble Phantasm then, like Ryogi, will probably be his Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. He'll likely be single target as well, like Ryogi, although personally I would make him a quick servant to differentiate him from Ryogi, especially since Shiki's abilities with the Nanoha arts are described to make him one of the fastest humans on Earth. The third most likely that I predict is Syou, for two reasons. One, because Syou is cool, don't deny that, and two, the remake is so far going to only cover the near side routes of Tsukihime, which means that the far side routes, including Akiha's and hopefully Satsuki's, are going to be released later. As a result, adding them right now is probably going to be a lot more unlikely, especially when it means potential spoilers for those routes. Syou has two potential classes. The first one is Assassin, since she's a church executioner, and has a fighting style that includes attacking while people are off guard, rather than direct confrontation. I don't think this one is as likely though, since Shiki would already be an assassin, which means I predict her class will be Lancer. The reason being that I think her Noble Phantasm will likely be the 7th Holy Scripture, so it'll probably also be single target. There are two more possible candidates, however, I think these two will be a lot less likely, at least until the Far Side stories come out. First off is Akiha Tono. Being a half-blood with demonic influence, she could probably manifest into either Berserker, since it would fit her wider abilities and she does go quote-unquote crazy at times, or Caster, as you can argue that her abilities to absorb life could make her classify as one. But I think this is a lot more unlikely since her powers are not related to Magecraft at all. Her Noble Phantasm could then maybe include her absorbing her opponent's HP or buffs. Second potential candidate is Satsuki Yumizuka. Spoilers for Tsukihime for a little bit since Satsuki's story hasn't been shown in any trailers so far, so leave before 3, 2, 1. Satsuki ends up becoming a Dead Apostle ancestor, and her abilities are stated to be potentially quite insane. If that's the case, she could be a Berserker, or she could share Archwade's class as Funny Vamp. Her Noble Phantasm will likely be her own reality marble, Depletion Garden, which could be an AoE enemy debuffing NP like Rhinus's. So out of these options, how will we get them? Most people think Archwade will be a welfare, but Nasu has gone and said that he wanted Archwade to be a 5-star in the past. And another thing that you may notice, that while there is one exception, all welfares tend to be the main protagonist, or what's closest to the main protagonist, of each respective series. So going off that knowledge, I think what's most likely is Shiki Tono as our welfare, Archwade as a 5-star, and Syou as a 4-star, with potentially Akiha or Satsuki coming in on a rerun. However, if we ignore what Nasu said earlier, another potential order I think is likely is Archwade as our welfare, Syou as the 5-star, Akiha as the 4-star, and Shiki as a limited 3-star. This selection also gives us the chance of having a welfare that isn't just a reskinned version of another, and the chance of getting both Akiha and Satsuki down the line. Now, if Tsukihime won't work for Satsuki though, there's always Melty Blood. Of course, the current status of Melty is kind of up in the air since the remake seems to be shifting the canons quite a bit, so I'll just go off what I know. Aside from Satsuki, another servant we could potentially expect from a Melty Blood event would of course be the protagonist, Sion Eltnam Atlasia. I predict Sion could apply for various classes, Archer, since she has the barrel replica, Caster for her magecraft, or even Berserker thanks to her vampire nature. Heck, she could be a third funny vamp. Her Noble Phantasm would be hard though, since comparatively, Sion doesn't have a big ultra finisher other than her said barrel replica. Although that I don't think is very exciting. Maybe it could be something relating to Dust of Orisis instead. Another potential servant, and the one I would personally want, is Sion's girlfriend, screw it, I still can't pronounce her name. With Satsuki, this could complete the back alley alliance in one event. If she had a class, the easy answer would be Lancer, and that's probably what she'll be. But if I could be given a choice, I want her to be a shielder. And maybe she can have a gimmick where using some of her skills switches her type advantages and disadvantages between Knight, Cavalry, and Extra? Just an idea the light works. Obviously though, her Noble Phantasm would be true Apocrypha, and then maybe we can learn what that landscape is. That should be enough to make an event, but for fun, here's a fourth servant. We could also have Knight of Wallachia. Being a magus, he could be a caster. Although, depending if we do get Tsukihime's version of the character, he could also be a berserker or alter ego. I'm not sure about Fate's version of his powers, but if we're using Knight of Wallachia, his Noble Phantasm would without a doubt be his reality marble, the Tatari. Potential servant order would depend entirely on whether or not Satsuki is part of this event, and whether or not Sion would remain the protagonist of Melty Blood. Assuming Satsuki is part of the event and Sion gets demoted, Satsuki has a welfare, with Sion being the desired 5-star due to character popularity, thanks to both Melty Blood and Fate Grand Order, with Riesbeif being the 4-star, and maybe a Wallachia or Zepia for the 4-star on rerun. If Sion isn't demoted though, just swap her in Satsuki's places, as Satsuki is easily the most beloved character, and Sion would make for a very good protagonist welfare. The next high potential collaboration I want to talk about is Fate Prototype. Reason being, Fate Prototype is the only remaining major Fate work that hasn't gotten a collaboration event, and with Proto Arthur and Proto Ku in the game, having it is essentially a given. There are some people who theorize that this won't happen, and that it will likely be related to Lost Belt 6.5 instead since that relates to King Arthur. But I think there's a chance, since there's a certain prototype servant missing from Fate Grand Order's roster that doesn't link with King Arthur at all, and it feels like the Lightworks is saving that servant for an event like this one. And of course, what I mean by that is Prototype Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is of course the Archer of Fate Prototype, with similar yet different abilities to the Gilgamesh we got. Rather than Gate of Babylon, he has Babilu, which is a tattoo that acts as his mark of kingship and lets him summon his weapons. Rather than summoning from gates anywhere though, Babilu summons weapons from 10 orbs behind him. Compared to Gilgamesh from Fate's Day Night, Proto-Gilgamesh is actually proficient in combat, and he wields Enki along with Babilu in a direct fight. Enki usually stay on his back as a pair of swords, but they can also change to become Tonfa Knights, and should Gilgamesh use Enki at his full potential, he must wait 7 days for it to charge, until he can fire Tracer Arrow, which can summon a massive flood of something that I won't even dare to try and pronounce. Since prototype servants don't tend to be that different from their original, Proto-Gil's NP will probably also be an AoE Buster Noble Phantasm that does a shit ton of damage. What do you expect? Second servant candidate is the Rider of Fate Prototype, Perseus. Due to Prototype's lack of existence though, there are hardly any details of his abilities. He's listed to apparently have many Noble Phantasms, but none of them have any real detail to talk about, so it'll be up to the game to fill in the gaps should he be added. There are other prototype variants of servants such as Heracles and Kojiro, but we don't know anything about them to make proper details. But out of the 3 that we do know about, Gilgamesh is the only one that's yet to be added, and if I recall correctly, was even data mined at one point. The next potential servant I want to bring out is one that can be for this event, or a potential enemy for Lost Belt 6.5. And that, of course, is Manaka Sajio, the master of Arthur in Prototype Fragments, as well as the main villain of Prototype itself. Manaka is an extremely important character in all of Fate, because she used the Grail to summon a beast-class servant. Many theorize that she ends up fusing with it, which would make sense. And this means that in Fate Grand Order, where we are fighting all the beasts, it is not hard to come to the conclusion that a battle with Manaka's beast, or more likely, Manaka fused with her beast, is inevitable. It is also the reason Proto-Arthur is traveling timelines in Fate Grand Order. It is to clash with and to defeat this very beast. So it is more than likely that we are going to be there with him to do it. Other abilities are completely unknown, but do know that if Manaka gets added, she's going to be a beast-type servant like Kiara or Kama, and lore-wise at least, is going to be ridiculously overpowered. Finally, and the real reason I want a Prototype event, Ayaka Sajio. She's the protagonist of Fate Prototype and one of my favorite characters in fiction. Ayaka herself is a magus, so caster is an easy class, and honestly, I kind of have trouble thinking what else she could be. I do also predict that she could also become a pseudo-servant, and maybe that will affect her class and abilities. Although as such, I wouldn't know what she could potentially do, cause I'm not a historical expert. I don't know, I just want Ayaka to be honest. So, for a potential roster, following the protagonist rule, Ayaka would be the welfare, and if we're purely talking Prototype, Proto-Gil would likely be the limited 5-star, followed with Perseus as a potentially even permanent 4-star in the game, and as a result, Manaka would likely be added in Lost Belt 6.5 or some other means. Third on the potential collab list is of course, Witch on the Holy Night, better known as Mahoutsukai no Yoru, or Mahoyo. The original Mahoyo novel is the first Nasuverse work, and it is what made the original rules and concepts that Nasu would build the entire Nasuverse off of, and the visual novel version is one of Type Moon's most visually ambitious works. Mahoyo has a much smaller main cast, which makes talking about its potential servants much easier. First on the list is of course, Aoko Aozaki. Mahoyo doesn't really have a protagonist since the story is told through various characters' perspectives, but Aoko is what I'd call the closest thing we have to a conventional protagonist. For class, we have a bit of a conundrum since all of the characters in Mahoyo are Magi. Since Mahoyo is a story about magecraft, naturally, the class they would all be summoned in would be caster. However, that'd be boring. So due to the way Aoko's magecraft worked, we could stretch it and make her an archer instead. Her Noble Phantasm would most likely be the 5th magic since that's easily her strongest ability and is synonymous with her character. Second potential servant is going to be my personal favorite character of Mahoyo, and the reason I want this collaboration, Alice Kuonji. Now while you can stretch Aoko to archer, Alice is definitely a caster. Ploy Kickshot just doesn't work any other way. As for her Noble Phantasm, it's probably Diddle Diddle, since Diddle Diddle is what activates all of Alice's magecraft to begin with, and I predict it could be an AoE Arts NP where Alice fully unloads all of her ploys all at once, similar to Scheherazade's NP. The third potential servant I see, to nobody's surprise, is Toko Aozaki. People wondered why Toko wasn't chosen as a summonable character in Kano Kyokai's event, and well, the reason is, she was kind of a Mahoyo character first. The main villain even. Once again though, we are hit with the conundrum of class. If Alice is a caster, Toko would need to be something else, but I can't think of anything at all. So to conclude, we might have 2 casters in this event similar to Prisma Ilia. I have a lot less of an idea on what her Noble Phantasm could be since Toko is a mage with many abilities rather than a combat-centric one. And her iconic puppet making certainly isn't something that she exactly fights with. So maybe it could be her projection machine or sealed box that she uses in Kano Kyokai. You might also bring up Sojiro, but the thing is, Sojiro is generally a normal human when you ignore his extraordinary levels of physical strength. So while I love Sojiro as much as everyone else, I don't think he's likely to be in. However, if we must get another servant, we might see Lug Beowulf. Lug is a phantasmal beast who takes the form of a golden werewolf, and so I think he'd be more than well enough to classify as a berserker. And since he sticks with the Mahoyo cast after the main story ends, him being a recurring character in the future could increase his chance at becoming a servant. his Noble Phantasm would probably be some form of transformation into his Phantasmal Beast form, and it could be a self-buff NP like Orion's. So what's the potential order? Well, if we once again follow the protagonist rule, that would mean Aoko would be the welfare, and the two most likely candidates for the gacha are Alice and Toko. Alice should be the strongest mage of the bunch, so lore-wise she'd make sense to be the 5-star. However, due to Toko's status as a main antagonist, as well as her popularity boost thanks to Kano Kyokai, she might be who gets the 5-star treatment instead. I personally see Alice getting the 5-star treatment because her NP is going to need some big budget material. Although, I also wouldn't mind her being a 4-star since that would mean she'd be easier to get, and I want Alice. Luke Beowulf could then potentially come in for a rerun banner. Notes is by far the smallest Nasuverse story and the most underdeveloped. So barely developed and obscure that honestly I think that a collab with this one is very unlikely, even though aspects of its lore have been put into Fate Grand Order recently. However, with what we have, I think it might just be possible to scratch one out. So let's try imagining out one for fun. First servant, easy. Vivi. She is the most important character in Notes, and is basically the main heroine. Even if Gun God is technically the protagonist, Vivi plays the most important role and is generally seen as the mascot of Notes. I predict she'll be a foreigner, cause, alien. And her Noble Phantasm would likely be the leaves of Yggdrasil, the habitable corpse of type Venus. Possibly a barrier-type Noble Phantasm similar to John's Lumiose Eternel. Second servant choice should also be obvious. Gun God. Gun God is a normal person known for his ability to wield the Black Barrel. So with how the servant system works and making normal people able to fight as long as they have legends, it's not unlikely to see him potentially become an archer class servant, with of course his Noble Phantasm being the Black Barrel. And I predict it'll be a single target NP that removes all defense buffs before usage as well as piercing invincibility. Now for a third servant. There aren't really many options for a servant since Notes doesn't have any other major character, outside of one depicted only in character material. Ado Edom. Ado Edom could very much classify as a potential Saber class servant, with Slash Emperor as his Noble Phantasm. Although, since Slash Emperor only truly becomes special against an Aristoteles, maybe his Noble Phantasm could be the very act of him felling Aristoteles rather than the sword on its own, which would make it a giant damaging AoE buster NP. So, if this event were to be a thing, Gun God would again be the obvious welfare. However, perhaps we instead might see Vivi as a unique foreigner welfare instead, leaving Gun God to the 4-star slot. For the 5-star though, Ado Edom is by far the most powerful of all 3 characters, so he should definitely take that spot. Plus, if we do see an NP of Ado Edom using Slash Emperor as depicted in character material, it will need that 5-star budget. And as far as collaborations for other Type Moon works, that's all I can think of. Now, you might be wondering about the other Type Moon works I haven't talked about, and unfortunately, other than what I mentioned, I doubt the others will be getting any call-up events. Mahoutsukai no Hako. Maybe if it was finished, we could get a summonable Triton. I'd personally love it, but that thing was abandoned until further notice, so pain. Tsuki no Sango. That's a short, peaceful story about the value of stories themselves. There's no action in this one, and there's no need for any. It's just a simple short story with a message. Nothing more and nothing less. Room of the April Witch. Yeah, April Caster would be neat, but what the fuck would she do? Girls work? Maybe if they actually completed it. Fire Girl and DDD aren't part of the Nasuverse, so while they may be interesting, I don't think a collaboration with either is likely, especially since the latter hasn't even been touched in ages. Now, all of the collaboration ideas I shared so far, though, all have one trend. They are, of course, Nasuverse works. And while that's partially because, of course, Nasuverse works would be the easiest to work in canon, it does also come from the statement that Nasu made about wanting his events to make sense in universe. So, does that mean cross-franchise collaborations are impossible then? Not unnecessarily. And here's why. Believe it or not, the Nasuverse has already crossover with other franchises, and the following content is going to be covering the franchises that Type Moon has already crossed over with, that I could also easily see getting collaboration events in Fate Grand Order. Should Type Moon desire to finally make a true crossover, these are the collaborations that I see are coming. Now, this might come as a huge surprise to a lot of you, and I'm sure some of you don't even know what Nanoha is. Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha is basically a classic magical girl show, known for the time for being more mature than typical magical girl series, and it inspired the now very famous Madoka Magica. It is an excellent series, and a personal favorite of mine. Now, if you don't know, the creators of Type Moon, specifically Takeuchi and Nasu, are huge Nanoha fanboys. I commend their good taste, by the way. With Fate, the Nanoha character, not the franchise, being an apparent favorite for Takeuchi himself, who has made multiple illustrations for the franchise. Now you might be asking, well, just because they're fans of the franchise doesn't mean the crossover could happen, right? Nasu loves a lot of console games as well as Super Robot Wars, but they haven't got collabs. Oh, you naive child. As I said before, there has already been a collab. Type Moon and Nanoha already made an official crossover one-shot manga. One section was illustrated by Nanoha Vivid's mangaka, and the other, much larger section was a full crossover chapter that united the worlds of Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha, and what else than none other than Fate Kalei Liner Prisma Ilya, officially illustrated by Hiroyama himself. Yes, this is canon to the Nasuverse. You can't deny it. And an event for Nanoha would work, especially since we already have Ilya in the game. We can have them interact again. And oh boy, Nanoha just so happens to have 3 main heroines. Perfect for a collab. So the first serving candidate is obviously going to be our titular character, Nanoha Takamachi. Obviously, since all these characters are magical girls, they'd probably all qualify as caster. However, out of the bunch, Nanoha is the only one I'd say could be nothing else but a caster. Raising Heart does look like a lance in shooting mode, but ultimately it is still a wand that just shoots giant lasers. With Nanoha being a magical girl known for her heavy damage output, I see her possibly being a buster caster, with, hear me out, 2 buster cards and a buster NP. Her Noble Phantasm will probably be one of 2 things. Her iconic attack, Divine Buster, which would probably make it a single target NP, or they could instead make Divine Buster her Buster card animation, and instead make her Noble Phantasm an AoE NP by making it her deadliest heavy bombardment attack, Starlight Breaker. And boy, if Starlight Breaker ends up being the Noble Phantasm, well, I sure hope the Lightworks got the budget for animating that laser beam. Second serving candidate will of course be the fan favorite antagonist turned deuteragonist, Fate Testarossa Harloon. Fate, compared to Nanoha, has a lot more options for class. Her device, Bardiche, transforms from a wand to both a scythe and a massive fuck-off sword, which means, aside from caster, she could also be lancer or saber. And personally, I would prefer the latter, especially since Zanber form is apparently Bardiche's most powerful form. Fate's combat style is known for her incredible speed, so I think she should be a quick servant, no doubt about it. Fate is the only girl who has multiple forms, which could work for her ascensions, and her Noble Phantasm would likely be her strongest attack, Thunder Smasher, or, since she's a saber here, Plasma Zanber, acting as an AoE quick NP, maybe even multi-hit for Scotty looping. Final candidate is the last of the Nanoha trio, my girl, Hayate Yagami. Hayate, of course, aside from caster, could potentially be an archer considering she summons and shoots out various projectiles. For a card type, if Nanoha is Buster and Fate is Quick, Hayate should be none other than Arts. Hayate would have the most options for an NP since she's spoilt for choice spell-wise. Although, following the trend of other girls' NPs being their strongest attacks, Hayate would have the very powerful Giga Bombardment Ragnarok. It would have to be AoE, and hopefully multi-hit, so she could be a meta arts looper. Hell yeah! If you couldn't tell, Hayate is my best girl of the series, and I'm very biased. In fact, Hayate ends up as one of my top wife characters in all of fiction, with her adorable personality, Kansai dialect, shared love of boobs, killer legs, and Kana Ueda's voice. She's perfect. I'm getting off track. If we follow the protagonist trend, that would make Nanoha the welfare, and honestly an easy choice. This gives us the conundrum of deciding which of the two girls will be the 5-star. Fate is undoubtedly the most popular character. However, in terms of overall power, Hayate is the strongest of the three. I would personally put Fate as the 5-star because, she sells, and also because if Hayate got added, I would want to NP5 her. That being said, there is also potential that they'll do what Magia Record did and instead make Hayate the welfare. In which case, I win. But that also means Nanoha is an easy 5-star and Fate a 4-star. Simple as that. With a franchise as large as Nanoha, there are of course many other characters from the franchise that could easily qualify as a servant. But with a collab, it makes sense to focus on the essentials. If any franchise should open the gate for a cross-franchise collab, I think there is no better option than to give the honors to magical girl Lyrical Nanoha. And I, for one, hope it happens. Takeuchi, you listening? I know you want this too. Talk with Nasu. Make it happen. We're depending on you. Now the final work I want to talk about is one you may recognize from the recent April Fool's special. That's right, the one-of-a-kind wuxia puppet show with heavy anime influence, Thunderbolt Fantasy. If you don't know what Thunderbolt Fantasy is, it is the passion project of famous writer Gen Urobuchi, with its creation being a collaboration between Japanese media companies Nitro Plus and Good Smile Company, along with Peely International Multimedia from Taiwan. Urobuchi might be known for being dark, bleak, philosophical, etc., but Thunderbolt Fantasy is a completely different story. Rather than some commission, this is a story straight from Urobuchi's heart and soul. It is a large, epic adventure with indomitable spirit, hosting many characters equally interesting and lovable, combined with an amazing soundtrack and some of the best puppet action and direction you could ever find in the world. Thunderbolt Fantasy is not just a show, it is an unmissable experience. In other words, please watch Thunderbolt Fantasy. You have no idea what you're missing. Anyways, back to the topic of the actual video. The reason Thunderbolt Fantasy has a chance is because Urobuchi and Nasu are super good friends. To the point, Urobuchi wrote a pivotal entry in Fate's original trilogy. So of course, with Fate being Nasu's baby, and Thunderbolt Fantasy being Urobuchi's baby, they might as well have them play together, right? In fact, they did. As I mentioned already, the April Fool's video they made was a special crossover where Artoria was summoned into the world of Thunderbolt Fantasy, with a whole new puppet being made specifically for that special. That's crazy, and also equally as much potential. For servants, Thunderbolt Fantasy has a massive cast once again, but like Nanoha, we do have 3 main protagonists, perfect for a collab. First is obvious, the protagonist, Syou Fukan. Syou Fukan would undoubtedly be a saber, with swordsmanship that impressed even Artoria Pendragon herself. No other class would fit him as well. As for his abilities in Noble Phantasms, I can't discuss much without getting into spoilers, so please skip if you haven't watched, because the following is series-ruining level spoilers, at least for Season 1. So, 3, 2, 1. His NP could be one of 2 options. One is his legend as the Edgeless Blade, since he's so skilled that he doesn't even need to use an actual sword as his weapon. It could be a buff type Noble Phantasm that shows his ability to use any long object as a deadly weapon. The second option for a Noble Phantasm could possibly be instead the Sorcerer's Sword Index, and using it he could draw various world-ending weapons of power similar to Gilgamesh. However, I think this is a lot more unlikely, since Syou as a character would probably never use these weapons unless the situation is truly dire. Second servant, who else of course than the deuteragonist of the series, Lin Setsa. While Syou is our melee brawler powerhouse, Lin's way of fighting is far more deceptive and cunning, making him fit to be a caster to reflect his illusions, or assassin to fit his sneaky nature. Hell, he might even have Merlin's illusion skill. It fits the story. His Noble Phantasm could go one of 2 ways. Either his usual illusions and trickery giving buffs to the party and debuffs to the enemy, or it could be his hidden master swordsmanship. Either way, getting Lin Setsuha as a caster would be peak in my book. Finally, of course, who other than Dofuyo? Dofuyo is a bard, and using his trusty talking biwa, Ryoga, in combat, he fights with music, making blades of sound, in which case an archer class would work well for him. Although, Ryoga could turn into a sword, so he could classify as saber as well. His noble phantasm though will likely be his bewitched voice, which could maybe stun or charm the enemy party as well as giving them various debuffs. Now, the uncultured individuals might not think there's enough waifu in this roster, in which I say, waifu is nothing in comparison to 3 of the most badass characters in all of fiction, but if I must give some female alternatives, then I'll raise the possibility of Tanhi as a saber, Keigai as an avenger or caster, and Mutsu Tenmei as an archer. However, I say that these are more unlikely than not. And with that, we got a potential roster. And of course, Syou better be our goddamn welfare, or I'ma be heavy salty. If Syou is our welfare, then the dastardly Lin Setsuha would probably be the 5-star, considering his sheer presence in the world of Thunderbolt Fantasy, which of course leaves Dofuyo as our 4-star archer. Again, this roster might not have as many girls as one would like, but to anyone who's actually seen Thunderbolt Fantasy, I don't think any fan would complain about getting these Giga Chads in the roster. You'll understand if you watch. Please watch Thunderbolt Fantasy. With that, that's all for this video of potential future collaborations and my predictions on what Delightworks might give us should they happen. If you enjoyed this video, show your support and leave a comment telling me what you hope to see for collabs in the future. For now though, I will once again take my leave, and I look forward to potentially seeing you somewhere else on the internet. But until then, take care.